You're listening to the Mission Makers Show, a podcast that inspires humans to get into the mindset of success. My name's Farah Nanji, and I'm the founder of a business in the motorsports industry that explores leadership lessons from things like Formula One. I'm also a DJ and music producer in the underground electronic scene, and a public speaker on key topics like resilience, building high-performance teams, overcoming learning difficulties, and stimulating creativity. And to tie it all together, I love writing thought-provoking content as a journalist for these industries which are so unique in themselves. On this show, I'm sitting down with some of the most inspiring and driven people I've met around the world to talk about their processes, their failures, the lessons they've learned, and how they are truly making an impact for this world. My guest today is a rather special individual in the world of motorsport, Brian Sims. He's been involved with the sport for over 4 decades and has been a huge part of the changing landscape in motorsport. One of his biggest contributions to the sport was when he founded the Motorsport Industry Association, commonly known as the MIA, in 1994. It's a trade association that is recognised as the most powerful business organisation within motorsport, and whose 400 global members represent more than £9 billion of motorsport revenue worldwide. His achievements don't stop there though. As well as being a lifelong learner and a visiting fellow at several universities around the world, Brian's also had an impressive career in Formula One as the former marketing director of the Lola F1 team and the commercial director of the Benetton F1 team, a team whose notable members include people like Ross Brawn, Flavio Briatore, Pat Simmons, and drivers like Michael Schumacher, Jenson Button and Martin Brundle. He was responsible for acquiring lucrative multi-million-pound deals that brought global names like FedEx, Marconi and Gillette into Formula One for the first time. Brian is a killer salesman at heart, and this is something we talk a lot about in this episode, as well as his reflections through an amazing journey experiencing the sport in all of its glory and all of its gloom. Just before we begin, if you're interested in watching the video version of this podcast, head over to YouTube and type in Mission Makers Brian Sims to see the show. I'd love to ask you, how it all really began. When was the first memory you had of what your mission, you felt was when you were growing up?
I think my first memory was probably thinking I wanted to be like my dad. My dad was an RAF pilot during the war, and it almost felt that my destiny was to become a pilot in the Royal Air Force. And I remember at the sort of crazy age of 7, at my little local school, I led a squadron of planes around the playground, all young kids with their wings out making aircraft noises as we ran around. And that was really my first memory of a career. And Dad was fantastically helpful and took me to meet lots of friends in the Air Force and so forth. So that's really where my life started in terms of thinking beyond school.
And then how did that evolve over time into motorsport, which is the industry that you're heavily involved in for the last few decades?
In a strange way, I guess. I left school. I didn't go to university. I left school and got a job as a salesman for effectively a builder's merchant. My first job was fitting wheelbarrow wheels, which is very exciting. But the great thing about it, and you have to remember, in those days, getting a company car was the bee's knees. Yeah. I was 19 when I got my first company car, and that was very exciting. And I moved through a couple of companies. I worked for Goodyear, and then I became a Xerox salesman. And they taught me more about professional selling than I ever knew was possible. Really high reputation company. And later, through family, I went to a motor race. I saw these youngsters going around in cars, and I thought, wow, I fancy that. And realized that it took a lot of money, even in those days, to go motor racing. And so it was simply a case of applying the skills that I learned in the business world in selling to motor racing to get sponsorship. And that, little did I know, would be my life for the next 45 years.
Wow. But you had a passion as a driver as well, right?
Oh, yes, very much so. I saved up my pennies and attended a course over about 6 weekends at Snetterton for the famous Jim Russell International Racing Driver course. That's great, you can learn to go racing, but then to get a car and actually to learn and race is a different story. Yeah. And that's where sponsorship came in, and I managed to put together my first sponsorship deal before I'd ever sat in a racing car other than at the school.
Wow, that's amazing. You were born to do it.
I don't know about born to do it. It was a case of necessity. If I wanted to do it, Mum and Dad couldn't afford to do it for me, so I had to find my own way. Yes. And yeah, it's amazing where it takes you.
It is, and talking about where that's taken you, so how is that mission of being, passionate about motorsport, of driving, of liking fighter jets, where has that kind of evolved now over time, and where do you see that kind of going?
Well, I started off I was very lucky. In the mid-70s, it was possible to go motor racing in a category called Formula Ford. And Formula Ford was a very simple single-seater car with a Ford Kent engine. And you could buy a car, and a second-hand car with an engine, for about £2,500, can you believe? Yeah. And you could afford to run it if you had a friendly mechanic chum or mate or something who would look after the car for you on a salary, providing you were earning reasonable money. I mean, the thought, you can't do that today. And so I was able to compete against the likes of Nigel Mansell, Derek Warwick, Jim Weaver, all these famous drivers. And it's an indication of how successful that concept was, that for the Formula Ford Festival, which was held in those days at Snetterton and then moved to Brands, there were 265 entries for Formula Ford cars. 15 of the drivers I raced with in those 2 to 3 year that period went on to become Formula One drivers. Jesus. It's quite amazing.
So how did you fare against them on the track?
I sat behind Nigel Mansell on third row of the grid at Alton Park in my first professional race. Yeah. I was, let's call it a midfield runner. I was okay. I had a couple of sort of second places, but in the main I was midfield. But then you had to think that we'd get 100 entries for a race meeting, 3 heats, 24 cars each, and if you got through to a final, you'd done very, very well. Yeah. And I used to finish in the final probably in the sort of 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So I was okay, but I'd started late. That was my problem. I started racing. I got in my first racing car. I was 26.
Wow, that is late.
So I knew Formula One was never going to be an option.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. So today, what does that mission, of motorsport mean to you?
Today, motorsport, your views change. I was lucky enough that although I wasn't good enough to win Grand Prix and get into a Formula One team, I was good enough to be able to become a factory driver for Mercedes. And one thing, life is extraordinary. Life brings opportunities along, and it's taught me that opportunities come your way. Change brings opportunities. You've got to grab those opportunities. Yeah. And my first opportunity came on an Alitalia flight from Heathrow to Johannesburg via Rome. Yeah. Sitting on the plane, I'd done a season of Formula Ford, and a man sitting next to me on the plane said, "I see you're reading a motor racing magazine. Do you obviously enjoy it?" I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "Do you do any?" And I said, "Funnily enough, just started." He said, "And where are you heading now?" I said, "To the South African Grand Prix to visit my folks down there and go and watch the Grand Prix." So he said, "Well, when you get there, here's my card, come and see me." And that man was a Formula One team owner and went on to become the president of the FIA, Max Mosley.
Oh my God.
4 years later, I decided to go and spend some time in South Africa looking around, and the Grand Prix circuit at Calin was up for sale. So I rang Max in England. He remembered me. And he said, "What do you want to know?" I said, "Well, has somebody bought the circuit?" He said, "Yes, they have." I said, "Well, can you put me in touch with them? Because maybe I can get a job there, do some marketing, get involved with a race school instructing." He said, "Leave it with me." The next morning, I got a phone call from a South African called Bobby Hartsleaf. And he said, "Brian," he said, "I had a phone call from Max Mosley. I'm the new owner of the Kyle Army Grand Prix circuit. He said I should meet you, have a coffee with you." what are you doing at 4 o'clock this evening? We met at the Calin Ranch Hotel next to the track at 4 o'clock. He was there with his lawyer and accountant for another meeting. 6 o'clock, I walked out as manager of the Grand Prix circuit in South Africa.
Wow.
It was extraordinary. And that changed my life.
And what happened in those 2 hours that, you know?
Well, the fact that, number one, I became the manager of a Grand Prix circuit. I'd never worked in Formula One. I never thought I'd get to Formula One, certainly not as a driver. But suddenly an opportunity came, and I, in a way, fulfilled my dream of getting into Formula One. It wasn't doing what I wanted or expected to do, but there I am as manager. But life's never that easy. And what happened, the very first Grand Prix that I was manager of the circuit, and South Africa was a very popular venue on the Formula One calendar at that time. My very first effort at that, there was a big political fight between Bernie Ecclestone, who represented FOCA, the Formula One Constructors Association, and Jean-Marie Balest, who represented the governing body, FISA, as it was called in those days, now the FIA. And it resulted in the Italian teams taking the side of Balestra and not coming down to race at Calin. The Grand Prix took place, but not as a Grand Prix. It didn't count for points. It became a Formula Libre race. So I wasn't in Formula One actively. The following year, the Grand Prix took place, but another disaster. Niki Lauda led a driver's strike. So for 2 days, it looked as if there wasn't going to be a Grand Prix. The drivers locked themselves in a hotel in Johannesburg. They came to the track, locked themselves in a coach, and refused to race. And that was a baptism by fire when you've got to explain to the managing director of the sponsor of the event that there might not be a race.
Absolutely. And so you've had a fascinating career then going into, after that, into F1. Can you tell us a little bit more? I mean, what was that like?
Well, I carried on a racing career, driving for Mercedes in touring cars, which was great. And then I set up a motor racing school, but then with massive sponsorship. By now, I'm getting much older, and the word is out that this guy, Brian Sims, knows how to get sponsorship. So it wasn't long before Formula One came knocking on my door. And I got an offer to work with an old racing driver friend of mine. We used to race in Formula Fords together, who was the managing director of Lola Race Cars, very, very famous brand. At that time, the largest race car manufacturer in the world. They supplied all the cars that raced in the Indy 500, cars at Le Mans, and they wanted to go Formula One. And I was hired to become the Formula One marketing director.
Wow, that's fascinating. So how was your whole, experience of F1? Was it a whirlwind? It obviously is so different to what F1 is like today.
It was very strange. Working for Lola was great. I went down to funny enough, our driver that year was Michele Alboreto, who'd driven for Ferrari, Grand Prix race winner with Ferrari. And I went and spent a lot of time with Michele. Unfortunately, the car was a bit of a disaster, and the season was more memorable for not qualifying at a lot of the races than it was for doing anything else. But it gave me the real bite to do it. But then, while I was at Lola, there was another life-changing moment in my life, in as much that Max and Bernie Ecclestone announced that the second most popular formula to Formula One was Formula 3000 in those days. It was what is today Formula 2. And it was where the young engineers cut their teeth. There were lots of engine manufacturers, suppliers, chassis manufacturers, brakes, tyres. It was a multi-choice formula. And they wanted to make it a single make formula. So there was one manufacturer of engine, one tyre, one brake, and that was it, which was, for a company like Lola, a commercial disaster. But it created an opportunity, and I saw it, and the opportunity was to construct or to develop a motorsport industry in Britain, which was recognised by the government as an industry sector in its own right. And I set up an organisation called the Motorsport Industry Association, which is now 26 years old, and which for the first 3 years I was CEO, handed over to somebody who could do a better job than I could in taking it right on from there. But that was my first stint in Formula One. And then as you'll see later, it was to another opportunity came and I moved on in Formula One.
Yeah, so you decided to kind of leave F1 to basically set up the MIA, is that right? And now I know the MIA is very strong and it's huge and it represents so much of the revenue in motorsport and the change makers. So is that a very intrinsic part of your mission? Is that where you focus most of your energy on now?
Not now so much. It was a very important part of my life because what it introduced me to a new sphere of motorsport. One of the objectives of the MIA, and I brought in big sponsorship from Accenture and Hewlett-Packard to start the organisation, was to create educational paths, career paths. There was no structure. If you wanted to be a mechanic in Formula One or an engineer, you were told, well, go and get a job with one of the small weekend teams, clean the car and work your way up. And you could realise that that was going to change. And we set up an educational program which resulted in 1997, the first ever dedicated motorsport engineering degree course anywhere in the world. Today, 17 universities are involved in motorsport engineering. I was lucky enough in my latter years to work as Formula One and motorsport industry consultant to Oxford Brookes University, one of the biggest and best of the lot. So life is, as you move forward and you get older, there are a lot of disadvantages, believe me, in getting old, but some advantages. One of them is you know a lot of people, you grow and get to know some fascinating people. And two, you learn how to spot opportunities and make the most of them. And that's, I guess if I had a skill, it's my ability to sell and my ability to spot opportunities and make them work.
And does intuition guide you quite a lot in opportunity spotting?
Yeah. Who could forecast that I'd sit next to Max Mosley on a plane?
Of course.
But that, I say to, I talk to a lot of young people lecturing and so forth, and I say opportunities are fantastic. The word potential's great, but unless you do something about those opportunities, they'll just float away and somebody else will grab them. So you've got to spot them, but then you've got to be prepared to make those opportunities work for you in terms of what you want to achieve.
Of course, I think that's probably 90% then of the job is materialising the opportunity that's come your way. So that being said, what was perhaps one of the hardest decisions that you've had to make in order to not compromise your mission?
Leaving the MIA in a way. It was my baby. I came up with the idea. I put together a very influential steering committee of 6 top people from the industry. Came up with the idea of approaching the House of Lords, and we had our industry awards there for 25 years now. And my wife went out to work so that I could afford to do this. And then to realise that the skills that were needed to set it up and get it going and bring people in and make it work were very different from the skills of carrying on and growing, getting involved with government, getting grants, work in terms of the industry matters. And it's quite sad because it's almost like giving up a child for adoption, I guess. Absolutely. There you are, it's your baby. Absolutely. But it's grown. I was made an honorary life member, one of only 4. That was a tough hurdle to overcome. Then going to the other thing, which was quite instrumental in my life in change again, was that I'd spent a lot of time in South Africa racing. My wife, I'd married out there, meeting her when I was racing with South African. And we went back after the elections when Mandela came in power and set up the South African Motorsport Industry Association, but for a very different reason to the British. The British one was to develop the industry. What I found in South Africa was that motorsport could play a very, very important part in helping young black kids who their sole mission in life was to get a job. Forget education and degrees and all this stuff. They needed a job in the townships. And probably most of them would end up as car mechanics. But to create an opportunity through education that for those who wanted to, they could go from garage mechanicking into high performance engineering and motorsport engineering. one of the great times of my life was, as you probably gather, and you know what I'm going to say, I brought in big sponsorship for that. The Dell computer company, their foundation came on board, and Petro SA, the big government oil corporation. Yeah. And when we launched Samir, we were able to fly Rory Byrne, who was a South African, the chief designer for Ferrari Formula One, and the man who designed the cars that Michael Schumacher drove to so many world championships. Wow. Flew him down to South Africa. And I'll never forget, he stood up in the audience and said, forget trying to get a young black South African racing driver. There are only ever 22 jobs in Formula One as a driver. But all you kids, if you don't give up maths at the age of 12, there is no reason why one day you can't work in Formula One, either on the marketing, commercial or technical side. Yeah. And that word spread around South Africa. And it was, sadly, a lot of corruption, which is well recorded in South Africa, that after 4 years, we had to give up the whole program. And I left South Africa and came back. And it was very sad to see, because more than that, 12 years has gone by, and none of those kids have gone into engineering skills training that they could have done. Yeah. All because of some very greedy people who are at the top of the pile.
So how do you overcome those hurdles of corruption, or do you have to admit that this is beyond your scope?
You have to admit, I spent 4 years banging my head on a brick wall. The organisation went very well. I had some tremendous players there, but I sat in a room with a government minister asking for money in a brown envelope. Yeah. How do you get around that? Yeah. You can't go any higher than that. You can't go to the top. Funny enough, one of my biggest supporters out there at that time was a man called Cyril Ramaphosa, who was then the head of the Black Empowerment movement in South Africa. Yeah. He today is the president of South Africa. Wow. But things have moved on. So too late. No, too late. Wouldn't go back. Yeah. Not now. You have to. The sad thing is that the organisation didn't stop when I left. I stood down and I said, look, I think we need to put a South African in there who can deal with these things. Of course. And it lasted 6 months and folded.
That's a real shame, huh?
It is. It's one of those things that you look back and you think, not a regret, because we did it. We started it, we got it there, and it was working. Yeah. But sadness of what it could have achieved wasn't allowed to be. And I love working with young people now. I get a lot of pleasure out of working with young people. It inspires me. You might disagree, but it keeps me young. It probably doesn't look it, but I am inside there is still a 21-year-old somewhere. And it is working with youngsters, because when I was at Xerox, one of my instructors came out with a saying that I've never forgotten, and I've tried to apply it all my life. And that saying was, there's only one thing more contagious than enthusiasm, and that's a total lack of it.
Fair enough.
And I've tried to live by that. And enthusiasm to me, I love seeing kids who are enthusiastic. Yeah. Because if you can't be enthusiastic with so many things going for you, then you've got a problem.
What's the point, right?
Like you, I mean, you got a fantastic enthusiasm. When I first met you and you spoke on the phone, and enthusiasm, people forgive you for mistakes. You can get away with, get away with murder, I'll rephrase that. You can get away with so many things if your enthusiasm is there and people can see it's genuine. Yeah, yeah. It's just people who just sit there. I can't. I battle with it.
No, me too. And I think it's really important, to surround yourself with tribes of people who kind of emit that sort of energy and fuel, as you said, your your drive. So with that being said, I mean, have you built up, throughout all these different sort of avenues, how have you built up a very interesting sort of tribe or team around you that you've kept motivated to that level, that are on your frequency?
I don't know that I have really, in many ways. I surprised myself in as much that I've tried to keep up with social media, sure. Which, believe me, at 73 years old, it's not easy keeping up with social media. But I've got about 2,000 followers on LinkedIn. Yeah. And I've tried to sort of stay with what and understand what youngsters want and try and help. The problem is that motorsport itself hasn't done any favours to young people, and I get appalled at the situation now in Formula One, for example, where talent in most sports, if talent, add determination to talent and it will get you somewhere. In motor racing, talent and determination on its own will not get you anywhere. No. It's talent, determination and money. And I've, for many, many years, been talking to the governing body of the sport in this country, to so many people, to try and bring some change and try to understand and help change the situation, because it's not a healthy situation. You know, we've seen in Formula One in the last 2 or 3 years, you know, 2 or 3 drivers who would not be there if it wasn't for the fact that they had very, very wealthy backing from parents. And to me, Formula One was the pinnacle of motorsport. And you expect when you go to a track or watch it on television that those 22 drivers are the best 22 in the world. I actually came up with an idea as to how you could change it. And it went down like a lead balloon from the teams.
But what about, you know, going, you know, to develop talent to be in F1, you need to start from a young age and you need to still have the money to compete from that young age. Because we were talking about it earlier. I mean, even before you get to F4, you've got karting, which once you start getting into it, could become easily 100k a year. So, you know, how do we level out? Is it down to government? I mean, you know, where do you see? No,
it's not. I don't think government plays a role in it. I think it's that Formula One teams are basically lazy when it comes to marketing. Because they know that eventually there'll be someone somewhere around the world will fill that second seat in their team and bring 80 to 90 million or whatever it is. And we've had so many cases of that. They will argue that's not the case, but we know in reality that is the truth. So what you do is, if you are a team and the teams got together and said, right, it's in all our interest that we bring more money commercially into the sport, because if we don't, we're not going to get the talented drivers coming through. So as part of the sponsorship programs that they offer, when a company comes along and said, look, we're interested in sponsoring you, let's say Force India, or it's not Force India now, but it was, what they could do would be to set up a structure and say, yes, you can come on, be our title sponsor for Formula One, but to do that, you have also got to put money into Formula 3, Formula 2 and Junior Formula 4, the feeder series. And that way, your prime structure of professional racing up to Formula 1. Club racing, you can never do that. But if your main channel to go Formula 1, Formula 1 is the problem. That's the one that sets the tone for everything else. And people want to see Formula 1 with the top drivers on the top tracks, in the top cars, competing, really going for it. Not just, well, we're getting 40 million, so it doesn't matter whether we finish first, second or third. If they had to go out there and fight to get into the top 10 to guarantee next year Formula 1, you would see some amazing racing. And I've had some reaction. I write for Paddock magazine, and Paddock magazine came back and said, wow, what a fantastic idea. We've sat down and discussed it, and we can't find any faults with it in terms of this. And I said the big fault in it is the Formula One teams wouldn't do it, because it means that the owner switches from drivers to them finding the money. Anyway, if you can't be controversial at my age, when can you be controversial?
Absolutely. So, but then, do you think that, from a sponsor's perspective now, do you think that the future is headed more towards people being more interested in Formula E and sponsorship in that, because of all of the greater impact it has?
I think motorsports, there are going to be a lot of big changes, and I think there's going to be a split in motorsport, a huge split, because when you think about it, Formula One now attracts most of the motor manufacturers, the OEMs, Mercedes, Renault, these sort of people, Honda. They want to go where the new car market is. The new car market, by government legislation here and almost around the world, is at the moment electric. 100%. and don't start me on that one. But they want to go electric. So for them, artificial intelligence, robotics, electric cars are the future, because that's where they're going to make their money. Yeah. The manufacturers are not in Formula One because isn't it a wonderful sport and we want to give the public all this. They're in there to sell cars. 100%. So that's the first point. So Formula Electric and the categories that are very different, driverless cars and so on, are attracting a new market of their own. Yeah. Very few people who are dyed-in-the-wool Formula One fans have really taken to Formula E. No. That's a fact, not an opinion. Yeah. So, in my opinion, and a lot of other people who I've spoken to who've come up sort of similar routes, what's going to happen is that motorsport is going to take a big divide. You're going to find that electric, artificial intelligence, robotics will go that way, taking the manufacturers with them. Mm-hmm. And that leaves the public who want to see entertaining, exciting racing, noisy cars, cars that don't look as if they're on rails and so incredibly easy to drive by comparison that a youngster of 16 can get in and go quickly. They want to see real racing on real tracks. And I think that we know for a fact historic racing is getting bigger and bigger. 2 years ago, I took a group of people, please don't laugh at this, I was a speaker, celebrity speaker on a cruise liner, did a few trips that year. Yeah. And I took a group of 60 guys, and women, mostly guys, to Monaco, to the historic Formula One race. Yeah. We also went to the Cannes Film Festival as well, which was interesting. Had a good time, eh? Oh, wonderful. But I've never seen it before. Grown men watching the John Player special, watching Niki Lauda's old Ferrari coming out of the tunnel, the sound, the noise of Formula One as it used to be, cars that don't handle as if they're on rails, snaking under braking. The crowds were phenomenal. That is getting bigger. You've got the Goodwood Revival, you've got the Silverstone Classic, the Le Mans Classic, all these big race meetings now, and they are filling. I went to the Silverstone Classic. Both the national and the international paddock were absolutely chock-a-block full of cars. So you've got this split. And how that is going to develop is going to be very interesting.
And it is part of your mission, historic motorsport.
Yeah, I've just set up another, I seem to set up a lot of associations, don't I? I've set up the Historic Racing Association to bring together all of the incredible different types. You've got historic Formula Ford, historic Formula 3, historic Le Mans cars, Group C. Bring them all together under, and to help grow the sport, bring more young people in, and to make it a career option for youngsters, because there's an aging workforce in historic racing. And these cars are really quick cars, so they need some good talent.
Very specialised.
But nobody really knows where motor racing is going. But that's how a lot of people see it. That there is going to be a split: entertainment type racing, and racing because we're trying to sell cars, and that's the only way we can test and develop those cars.
So talk to me a little bit about success habits. Do you have any, and have they changed or?
What I have found is I've been working for myself effectively for many years now. You do learn what works for you and what doesn't. I have a way of working. I've recently written my autobiography, so that was an interesting example of this. And I found that I can't sit in front of a computer all day working. It just drives me completely bonkers. So I spend a lot of time. All my presentations that I'm doing, if I'm working creatively on sponsorship presentations or presentations in training, education, whatever, I get my best ideas sitting in a noisy coffee shop with lots of people all around me, leaving me alone, but letting me do that. Sitting in front of a screen, I don't come up with any ideas at all. I might as well be looking at a brick wall.
So you need to be around stimulation.
Yeah, you stimulate from that. One of the things that I'm very lucky is that you realise how many people you know in the motorsport world when you get much older, and you have that same passion. And I went to an old school reunion fairly recently. I won't tell you which number, but it was quite a big one. And what we found there, or I found, was a lot of people who made a lot of money. I seriously have not made a lot of money in my life, because unless you're at the very top in Formula One, you don't make these huge fortunes. But I went to this, and most of the kids at my school were lawyers, bankers, accountants, all looking very corpulent in their pinstripe suits. There were 3 guys at the place who we all just somehow gravitated towards each other. In our own way, all very successful. One of them was Ian Gillan, lead singer for Deep Purple, who's probably made more money than the school put together. He went his own way, and he stayed very young. Why? Because he's passionate about what he does. What's his name? Another guy called Peter Casely went into the film industry, his passion, and he stayed young. And myself, in a way, I went into motor racing, and I'm mixing with people, most of them in the motor racing industry, and although I'll tell you a very quick story in a minute against that. Motor racing is their passion, and it tells. Banking, accountancy, finance, great. I wish I'd done it in one way. But I've been able to do this. And so I meet people all over the world who we work together in our industry, and you've always got something in common.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about that industry, have you been a part of the Women in Motorsport sort of movement? I'm sure you must have encountered females in motorsport way back when you started. So yeah, tell me a little bit about
Well, first of all, I got a Formula One driver girl, sponsorship to race the Tyrrell Formula One in the South African Grand Prix that was cancelled as a Grand Prix and run as a Formula Libre race. Her name was Desiree Wilson, South African girl, brilliant, drove a Tyrrell, raced in America in the Indy Series. I've worked with Lynn St. James, who's an incredible American woman who raced in the 90s alongside with Nigel Mansell in Indy 500. I mean, to race in the Indy 500 for a woman physically, she's tiny, Lynn. She set up an amazing sponsorship program called Spirit of American Woman. And she got sponsorship from the big store group, J.C. Penney, and put together all the different suppliers, toiletries, all sorts of clothing, fashion, perfumes on the car, and went motor racing. And I've spoken a lot of time with her. I've met Susie Wolff, spoken to her quite a lot about it. I have some quite strong views about women in motorsport. I met Leila Lombardi. That year I went down with Max Mosley to South Africa. Leila Lombardi was driving the March Formula One car, and the only lady to have scored points in a world championship.
Yes.
And I have some quite strong views on it. I don't know if you want to hear those.
What are these strong views?
Well,
please share.
I don't think that Susie Wolff stood up and said there's a glass ceiling for women in motorsport. I don't agree at all with that. I don't think there is anything that stops a woman being a successful motor racing, or has done over the years, that any different to what stops a young guy being a top racing driver. It's down to money. Talent, if you've got talent as a young guy but no money, you are very lucky if you get through. There's a glass ceiling. If you've got talent as a woman, as a racing driver, there is no glass ceiling. But if you haven't got money, it's going to be difficult. What I believe is that there are some women who've done incredibly well, and Lynn St. James talks to me about this. She's now set up in America a program called Women in Winner's Circle to promote women in motorsport. But she said the worst thing you can do is women need to realize that there is nothing to stop them any more than a young guy. It's not a sexual thing at all. And most racing drivers will tell you that. Physically, yeah, maybe at some levels in IndyCar racing, Lynn said was in 260 miles an hour on banking, physically is very, very demanding. And even for young guys, they've got to really build up a lot of muscle strength and so forth to do that. But it's all about not standing up and saying, I'm a woman and want to go motor racing, I'm different. It's about saying, I want to be a racing driver.
Yeah, absolutely. And
there are quite a few women who've done that and didn't get the publicity, but have just got on with it. And so you've got Formula Woman now, Formula W.
W Series.
W Series.
But do you not, I mean, I think that
look, money will be the ultimate deciding factor at this moment in time, and you know that's definitely the case. I think that there was a statistic like today, 8% of carters are female, and that's today, right? So I think there's been a change. There has to be a massive change in mindsets from the young age of actually this is something that we could do. Motorsport in itself is not an accessible sport or career path for the most average human being. So so you're going up against an 8% statistic, and then you've got to compound that with like a hell of a lot of money. So the person who's going to make it into F1 is more than likely going to be a man, because you've got 90% more whatever people in the playing field. But do you think that there is something? I mean, why has there still been it being blocked from Formula One in itself? Like, why hasn't it got to that stage where a team can say, we see the value in this, we see this driver, we want to give her that chance?
Because there hasn't been anybody good enough.
You just think there hasn't been anybody good enough?
No, or hasn't had the money. Yeah, I think what I'm saying is I think Formula One is wrong because it's doing that with men. Yeah. It's effectively saying, unless you got the money, if you got the money, you're good enough. Yeah. Get in a Formula One within reason. I mean, but Formula One's been saying that for a long time. I know 2 or 3 right now, young drivers, incredibly talented, out there trying to find £350,000 to get on the ladder. Yeah. Now, whether they are male or female, in fact, I think female have more advantage because there are less of them at the moment in terms of out there. Where I think women have gone wrong is the way they've gone about the marketing side of it. And you're a great marketeer, and I'm sure you'll appreciate this. So many women have sent out photographs of them. I want to be the first woman to go into Formula One, or I'm a woman, do this. Instead of saying, okay, here's a business plan for your company that is going to give you this, this, and this to help you sell more products or services. Don't even talk about whether you're male or female any more than I would. I don't walk into a company and say, I'm a man, and I've got this amazing thing built around men to get me into Formula One. I go in and say, I'll help you sell more products and services. And if more women had understood that, I had quite a disagreement with Susie over this, because when she started Dare to Be Different, I said, I don't think that's the right way to do it. Really? I seriously don't think it is. I said, I think what we should be investing in is far more programs at the lower level where you can get any youngster in. The same thing, if I can go off tangent a little bit for a minute, it's the same in engineering, motorsport engineering. There is nothing to stop women coming into motorsport engineering. It's just that there hasn't been the demand, because sport hasn't promoted itself as accepting them and saying, this can be a great career for you as a woman, just as it is as a man. So it's a combination of things.
But that's what Dare to Be Different is trying to sort of showcase through these kind of days in schools, and bringing in some people from
to a certain extent,
the exposure which you never in our days, I'm sure in school we did not get that exposure, right?
No. Well, I won't go into details, but I got Oxford Brookes University involved in the Dare to Be Different, and they pulled out because they were being asked for money and all sorts of things, which they said that's really not what it's about. Yeah. But I just feel that we've missed the plot a little bit on there, and I think that what is needed is a program to sell motorsport to young people in a way that they can afford. Yeah. Make it attractive to them, whether they're male, female or not, but have the opportunities there for them to do it. And you'll find it will take care of itself. But I find it, I managed to get a career racing up to very high level, just one step below Formula One. Not because I was a man or because I was a woman or anything. I got it because I was able to get companies to see how they could sell more products by getting there. Yeah. And nobody has really turned around to motor racing young people and said, this is what it's about. We're going to do and embark on a training program, helping you get sponsorship. I went to the MSA and said, why don't we go out to British industry and set a campaign backed by you called, the name of it, what can motorsport do for your business? Didn't want to know. Did not want to know. And that is where it's wrong. Companies don't understand sponsorship because they're not in the sponsorship business. What they do is sell their products.
Yeah.
It's our job to go out and say, this is how sponsorship can help you do better with your business.
Yeah.
And by the way, you get some fun and entertainment out of it at the same time. We don't do that. We assume that companies know how to get money out of working in motorsport. They don't. They are as ignorant of sponsorship as most racing drivers actually are when it comes down to it. You know, there's a strata that take the trouble, like people like Dino Zamparelli, who, you know, came on courses, learned the hard way, and is now educating others in how to get sponsorship as well.
Yeah.
But most youngsters don't want to know. They'll spend £500 on a new helmet, but you say to them, spend £500 on a training course to learn how to get money. Well, I'm not doing that. So I think there's a very fundamental point that's been totally missed, and that is getting people when they're very young and explaining how it works, and at the same time going to the business world and saying, we don't want charity, we don't want you just, oh, let's help this kid, he wants to go Formula One. But this is a fantastic opportunity to sell more products and services, and we'll show you how that works. Put those two together and you've got a fantastic platform.
But if that person isn't in F1 yet, is it really that attractive for a brand?
Oh yeah, I mean, otherwise how would I have got my first ever sponsorship deal?
No, and I'm playing devil's advocate.
Yeah,
right?
no.
You know,
That's the problem.
Yeah.
It's scale. Because
you see a lot of drivers who have the similar proposition, you know, put the logo on the car, put this hospitality, but you know, what is it that really will take them to the next, you know, set them apart from their competitors, really? That's...
My first sponsorship deal, which I mentioned, I didn't explain what it was I was driving down the street in Maidstone, and I saw a big sign at the side of the road, Victoria's nightclub opening here in, I can't remember what it was, 3 months' time. I went back. I didn't have internet to go and do any research. So I went to the local library and newspaper offices and found out, and it turned out that they were going to be giving a business lunch to launch this club, and it was a members club. It doesn't take a lot of rocket science to work out that if it's a new club, they've spent a lot of money on the building. And what are they going to want? They want memberships. They want to sell memberships. Yeah. So I found a way of helping them through my motor racing program. I'd never been racing before, so I put together one, how they could sell more sponsorship by having a race car in the shopping mall on a Saturday morning in Maidstone with a promotional person selling subscriptions alongside with opportunities to go and have a track day and all this stuff. And I got a sponsorship deal. And they were delighted because they sold more subscriptions. Now, it didn't matter. I could have been a girl doing that just as easily. If a girl had gone to them, they'd have got the deal.
Of course. Yeah.
And that's what's missing is, you know, you can't expect parents, youngsters, to pay $350,000 for a seat in a Formula 4 car and understand how to go out and find the money from the business world when nobody within the sport is doing a blind bit of help to help them get that money.
It's a hell of a lot of money, and it's every year. It's not something that just stops. Right?
I told you I'd be controversial.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're strong feelings that I have based on experience. Absolutely. They're not just picked out of the sky. And I've seen time and time again ideas to get women into motor racing, and they all of them miss the basic point that you don't have to do that. It's how to get anybody into motorsport. It's that easy. Anyway, there we go. Hopefully one day somebody will wake up to the fact.
Well, let's just hope it's sooner rather than later right, that things change. But Brian, thank you so much for your time.
No, I hope I haven't been too many old boring stories.
No,
but
not at all. No.
It's been lovely talking with you.
Absolutely, thank you, and yeah, we will be speaking to you very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
You don't get the chance to meet or even learn from someone like Brian every day. Every time we speak, Brian always shares fascinating and empowering insights with me, and something I've always admired about him is just how passionate he is in helping others to succeed and transmitting the most precious currency of all, knowledge, to the future generations. There's a lot to take away from this episode, and I think particularly one of the things he said that really stands true in this current moment is that when we look back, Hopefully we'll see a life's journey that was extraordinary, and that journey brought opportunities to all of us. Change is inevitable, and sometimes that change is very, very uncomfortable. But all moments of change bring opportunities in some shape or form, and we have to come out of that change with growth and with a mindset of winning, because as Brian says, you don't have to be a champion to be a winner. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to this episode. I hope you're leaving with some great inspiration that can help you with whatever you want to achieve in your life. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe via your favourite podcast platform so you can be notified when a new episode is posted. It would also mean the world to us if you could rate and review the show and share it with your friends so we can reach as many people as possible. If you want to reach out to me as well, you can get in touch directly at dj.n1nja on Instagram and Twitter. That's dj.n1nja, and also at Mission Makers on social media. Thanks so much again for listening. Until next time, Mission Makers, stay safe and have an amazing week.